The doorbell echoed through the $15 million mansion in Beverly Hills, interrupting my Saturday morning. It was 8 o'clock, too early for visitors, but the security screen showed a young woman standing at my front gate. Wavy brown hair, familiar green eyes, nervous posture of someone gathering courage. My heart stopped. 20 years. 20 years since I last saw that face, when she was only 8 years old and begged him not to leave as Rebecca's lawyers escorted him out of the house he once called home. My name is Neil, I'm 52 years old, and the daughter I was prevented from seeing for 2 decades was standing at the entrance to the life I built without her. Dad? Her trembling voice echoed through the intercom. It's me, Amy. I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you. My hands shook as I pressed the gate button. For 20 years I had imagined this moment, dreamed of him, feared it would never come. I had built a tech empire with 300 employees, amassed a fortune that put me on the Forbes list, bought this mansion overlooking the ocean, but no achievement had filled the void left by her absence. Amy walked through the circular driveway, his eyes scanning the meticulously manicured gardens, the Italian fountain in the center, the marble columns supporting the main porch. As a teenager, she should have run along these same paths, should have grown up in these spacious rooms, should have been part of every brick laid. Wow, she murmured as I opened the front door. So it's true. You did it. I finished, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, I did. Come in, please. I led her into the main living room, where paintings by Monet and Picasso adorned the walls. Investments Rebecca once said were a waste of money for someone like him. Amy sat on the edge of the Italian sofa, clearly uncomfortable with the opulence around her. Mom never told me, she said, looking out the window at the infinity pool that stretched to the horizon. She never told me he had all this. Rebecca. Just hearing Amy mention her name brought back bitter memories of court hearings, of baseless accusations, of a judicial system that believed every rehearsed tear from my ex-wife. Rebecca had managed to convince the judge that I was an unfit father, dangerous even, using his humble origins against him. Your mother said a lot of things, I replied carefully. I imagine most of it wasn't very flattering. Amy looked away. She said he abandoned us. That he chose his career over his family. That when things got tough, he just disappeared. Each word was a stab. 20 years of carefully constructed narrative by Rebecca, 20 years of my daughter believing I was the villain of the story. But looking at Amy now, seeing how she avoided her gaze, I realized there was more behind this unexpected visit. Amy, I said softly, after 20 years, you show up at my door. I don't believe it's just to check if her mother's stories were true. She sighed deeply, finally looking me in the eye. I'm in trouble, Dad. Serious trouble. And Mom. Well, Mom said you were the only person who could help me now. Interesting. Rebecca, who had spent 2 decades painting me as a monster, was now sending our daughter to him when she needed help. That could only mean one thing. The problem was big enough for her to swallow her pride and admit she needed the man he had tried to destroy. If you're following this story of reunion and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how this meeting after 20 years would change everything. But as Amy looked at me with a mixture of hope and despair, I was already calculating in my head. This wasn't a simple father-daughter reunion. It was the first move in a game Rebecca had started decades ago, but one I was finally in a position to finish. What kind of trouble? I asked, gesturing for Amy to make herself more comfortable on the couch. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she fiddled with the strap of her purse. Financial trouble. Legal trouble, too. I've made some bad choices over the last few years. Rebecca. Even after 2 decades, I could still feel her poison seeping into our daughter's life. I remembered perfectly the day it all fell apart, when Rebecca used every rehearsed tear and every carefully constructed lie to turn me into the monster in the story. Her mother has always been creative with the truth, I said calmly. Tell me about these problems. Amy took a deep breath. I invested all my savings in a business my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, was developing. An app startup. He said we were partners, that we were going to build something together. She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped. I found out last week that he registered everything in his name. All the money I invested, all the work I did, just gone. The irony was not lost on me. Rebecca had painted me as someone who abandoned his family for money, And now our daughter was the victim of exactly the kind of financial betrayal Rebecca had falsely accused me of committing. How much money? I asked. $100,000. It was everything I had. Grandma Patricia's inheritance, my savings from my jobs, her voice faltered. And now there are legal issues. Apparently, he used my name to secure loans I can't pay back. The lawyers are saying I could face fraud charges. Grandma Patricia, Rebecca's mother, who had also chosen to believe her daughter's lies. Interesting how the money from the family that rejected me had now evaporated in the hands of another manipulator. And Rebecca? Where does she fit into this? Amy looked away again. Mom, well, she's in no position to help. After she married Derek, things got complicated. They divorced last year and she lost almost everything in the settlement. Derek. The man Rebecca chose after destroying me. I remembered seeing him in photos on social media, a confident-looking executive that Rebecca had paraded around like a trophy for years. Apparently, he had also grown tired of her manipulations. It was Mom who suggested I look you up, Amy continued, clearly uncomfortable. She said you had resources, and that you might be the only person who could help me. 20 years. 20 years of Rebecca painting me as an irresponsible, selfish father who had abandoned his family. And now, when they needed money, suddenly I was a viable option. Amy, I said gently, I need to tell you some things about what really happened between me and her. Things I'm sure she never shared with her. She cringed slightly, as if anticipating a painful revelation. When you were 8, I didn't abandon you. I was forced to leave. I stood up and walked over to a closet where I kept a folder I hadn't opened in years. His mother built a case against me based on lies. She told the court that I was violent, financially unstable, that I was a danger to you. I took out the copies of the legal documents I had kept as evidence of the injustice. She got a restraining order claiming I had threatened her. I never laid a finger on her, Amy. Never. But she had witnesses, friends who confirmed stories that never happened. Amy took the documents with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the pages. This can't be right. Mom said you abandoned us because of your job, that you wanted to move to San Francisco for your career. I moved to San Francisco because it was the only place I could find work after Rebecca destroyed my reputation here. She spread stories about me to everyone we knew. She said that he was unstable, that he had drug problems, that he owed money to dangerous people. My voice remained calm, but I felt the old anger boiling beneath the surface. None of it was true, but Rebecca was always very convincing. Why would she do that? Amy whispered. Because I had found out about her affair with Derek. They had been together for months before I knew. When I confronted Rebecca, she didn't deny it, she just said she wanted a divorce. I agreed. But she didn't just want a divorce, she wanted the whole story. She wanted to be the heroic victim who escaped a terrible husband. Amy looked at the documents again, her expression gradually changing from confusion to understanding. She said he never tried to see us after the divorce. I went back to the cabinet and took out another folder, this one much thicker. Letters. 237 letters I wrote to his over the years. All returned unopened. Birthday gifts returned. Visitation requests denied by Rebecca's lawyers. Tears began to stream down Amy's face as she leafed through the letters, recognizing birthdays, graduations she had gone through without knowing I was trying to attend. I didn't know, she whispered. I really didn't know. And it worked perfectly. I sat back down, watching my daughter process 20 years of lies unraveling. Until today. But while Amy absorbed the truth about our separation, I was already calculating. Rebecca hadn't sent our daughter to me out of kindness or because she finally recognized the injustice she had committed. There was something else going on here, something Amy hadn't told me yet. And I had a strong suspicion that, just like 20 years ago, Rebecca was still playing a game far more complex than it appeared. There's more, Amy said, her voice breaking as she looked at the letters I had sent over the years. Mom didn't just tell him you abandoned us. She said you were dangerous. Dangerous. The word hit me like a punch in the stomach, even after 2 decades. Rebecca had been meticulous in her campaign of destruction, painting me not only as a negligent father, but as a real threat. What kind of danger? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Amy hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She said you had anger issues, that you had threatened to hurt her. When I was little, whenever I asked about him, she would get scared and say we needed to keep ourselves safe. She made air quotes with her fingers. I grew up believing you were some kind of monster. Rebecca had orchestrated every detail. It wasn't enough to remove me from Amy's life. She had to make sure our daughter never questioned his absence. Turning me into a threatening figure was the perfect solution. What about Derek? I asked. How did he fit into this narrative? Mom always said Derek saved us from you. That he was the hero who brought stability to our lives. Amy paused, looking out the window at my gardens. Ironically, Derek was the one who told me the truth about his divorce last week. Interesting. Derek, the man Rebecca had chosen as my replacement, was now revealing his secrets. What did he say? Amy took a deep breath. That Mom had lied to him too. Throughout his marriage, she told him stories about how unstable you were, how she had escaped an abusive relationship. Derek believed her and saw himself as his protector. She paused. Until he discovered the secret bank accounts. Secret accounts? Mom had been embezzling money from Derek's business for years. Small amounts, but consistently. When he found out and confronted her, she used the same strategy she used with you. She said he was being controlling, that she needed to protect herself financially because of past trauma with you. The pattern was repeating itself. Rebecca had used my supposed violence as an excuse for her future manipulations. Every relationship she destroyed became additional evidence of her victimization. But Derek didn't believe her? I asked. Not this time. He had seen the real Rebecca over the years. The little lies, the subtle manipulations, the way she isolated him from his friends. Amy looked down at her hands. He said he started to suspect that the stories about you were false too. I got up and walked over to the bookcase, where I kept a framed photo, the only photo I had of Amy as a child, taken secretly during one of the few supervised visits Rebecca was forced to allow before she managed to cancel them altogether. Did Derek contact him? I asked, still with my back to her. Not directly. But he did some research. He found out about his company, about his reputation in the tech industry. People who knew you spoke of you as someone with integrity, focused, never violent. Amy joined me near the bookcase. That's when he realized the extent of Mom's lies. I turned to face her. And he told you that? Last week, when Mom showed up at his house desperate, asking to borrow money. Derek called me and told me everything. He said I had a right to know the truth about my father. Tears began to stream down Amy's face again. 20 years, Dad. 20 years believing you were dangerous, that you had chosen to abandon us. The weight of the revelation was crushing. Not just for Amy, who was discovering that her entire life had been built on lies, but for me, finally realizing the full extent of Rebecca's manipulation. There's something you haven't told me, I said softly. About why her mother really sent him here. Amy looked away, confirming my suspicion. The legal problems I mentioned, they're worse than I said. It's not just about the money I lost to his ex-boyfriend. Go on. Mom was involved too. She knew Lucas, my ex, and she was the one who introduced me to him. She said he was a promising businessman, that he'd be a good investment. Amy paused. Now I found out they were partners from the beginning. The betrayal ran even deeper than I had imagined. Rebecca hadn't just allowed our daughter to be deceived, she had actively orchestrated the scam. Her mother helped steal from you. Worse. She used his name to secure additional loans I never knew existed. $200,000 in my name, with my signature forged. Amy sat down heavily on the sofa. When Lucas disappeared with the money, he left behind evidence implicating me as an accomplice. Investigators believe it was all planned by the three of us. Rebecca had used our daughter as a scapegoat for his own criminal scheme. The woman who had spent 20 years painting me as a monster had literally robbed and framed her own daughter. What now? I asked. Now Mom says the only solution is to get enough money to pay off the loans and make everything disappear before it becomes an official criminal case. Amy looked at me with a desperate expression. She said you're the only person with enough resources to help us. Help us. Rebecca was still including herself in the equation, as if she were a victim just like Amy. How much money? $500,000. To pay off the loans and cover the legal costs to make the investigation stop. $500,000. To Rebecca, it represented salvation. To me, it was less than I spent on a weekend on my yacht. But it wasn't about the money. Amy, I said calmly, his mother didn't send you here to save you. She sent you here to manipulate me. What do you mean? Think about it. Rebecca knows he's my only weakness. She's counting on my paternal feelings to make me pay for a situation she created. I walked over to my desk and picked up a notepad. She bet I'd pay any amount to protect my daughter, even if it meant saving her too. Amy processed this slowly. So, what do we do? I smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Not a smile of happiness, but one of recognition. Rebecca had finally made the mistake I had been waiting for 20 years. We do exactly what her mother expects, I said, writing a number on the paper. But not in the way she thinks. Amy looked at the number, $500,000, written in my handwriting. Dad. You said his investigators believe the three of you planned this together? Yes. What if we could prove that only two people planned it, and the third was an innocent victim? Amy's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to expose Mom? I don't want to expose his mother, Amy. I'm going to expose his mother. There's a difference. I sat down and started writing a list. Rebecca spent 2 decades using me as the villain in her stories. It's time to find out how she fares when the real villain is revealed. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the sweet anticipation of justice finally being served. Rebecca had made the fatal mistake of bringing our daughter into the game. Now, instead of just a victim of his lies, Amy would be the key to undoing 2 decades of manipulation. But first, I needed to make sure Amy was prepared to discover just how deep the rabbit hole his mother had dug. Because what I was planning wouldn't just save our daughter, it would expose Rebecca for who she really was, not just to me, but to everyone who had believed her lies over the years. And when it was over, Rebecca would discover that 20 years of silence didn't mean I had forgotten or forgiven. It meant I had had enough time to meticulously plan how this story would really end. Amy, I said, closing my notebook, I need you to tell me everything about Lucas, his ex-boyfriend. Every detail you can remember. She settled into the sofa, realizing from my expression that she had gone from victim to strategist. Lucas Brennan, 28 years old, said he had a degree in business from the University of Chicago. I met him at a party Mom threw at our house. Interesting. Rebecca had orchestrated their first meeting. What kind of party? A dinner for interesting people in business, according to her. Lucas was there with other young entrepreneurs. Amy paused. Now that I think about it, Mom made a point of seating me next to his side. She said she thought we'd hit it off. I turned on my laptop and started typing. University of Chicago, Business Administration, Lucas Brennan. The results appeared quickly, or rather, the lack thereof. Amy, there's no record of a Lucas Brennan graduating from Chicago with a business degree in the last 10 years. Her face paled. That's impossible. He showed me his diploma. Diplomas can be forged, especially if you have the resources and connections. I kept typing, accessing databases my company had developed for background checks. Tell me about his business. How did it work? A sustainable delivery app. The idea was to connect local restaurants with environmentally conscious consumers, using only bicycle delivery and biodegradable packaging. Amy looked down at her hands. It sounded brilliant at the time. I continued researching, using resources that my position in Silicon Valley afforded me. Contacts in government databases, business verification networks, systems that detected sophisticated fraud. I found something, I said after 20 minutes. Lucas Brennan exists, but he's not who he said he was. Real name, Lucas Martinez, 34 years old. History of financial fraud in Nevada and Colorado. Specialty, investment scams using fake identities. Full access to the phone and financial records of Rebecca Sullivan, Chicago. And also Lucas Martinez, also known as Lucas Brennan. That could take a few hours, Marcus replied. But we have the necessary resources. I hung up and turned to Amy. In the meantime, I need you to help me with something delicate. I need you to contact her. What? Why? Because we're going to give her exactly what she wants. Or at least, we're going to make her believe she's getting it. I walked over to my desk and grabbed a checkbook. You're going to call Rebecca and tell her you got the money. Amy looked at me confused. But won't that save her too? Amy, her mother has committed federal crimes. Bank fraud, document forgery, conspiracy. $500,000 won't make those charges go away. It'll just fund her escape and leave you as the scapegoat. The realization hit Amy like a slap in the face. She was planning to abandon me from the beginning. Exactly. But Rebecca has a weakness, her arrogance. She believes she can manipulate any situation. I sat down next to Amy. Let's use that against her. My phone rang, Marcus calling back. Neil, you're going to want to hear this. Rebecca Sullivan and Lucas Martinez had regular phone contact for 6 months before he met your daughter. They also share an offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. Amy listened to everything on speakerphone, his face shifting through confusion, anger, and finally bitter understanding. She was going to let me face the charges alone while she ran away with he. Yes. But now we have proof. I started writing a list of actions. Marcus, I need one more thing. Contact the FBI, Financial Crimes Division. Tell them we have information about an interstate bank fraud operation. Neil, Amy said nervously, if we involve the FBI, there's no turning back. Amy, his mother has already involved you in a federal conspiracy. The only difference is whether you're going to be seen as an accomplice or a victim. I picked up the documents Marcus had just emailed. These records prove that Rebecca and Lucas were partners from the beginning. Her signature was forged without his knowledge. You're the victim here. But there was something else I hadn't revealed to Amy yet. Something I discovered during my research that would make my revenge against Rebecca even more devastating. There's something you need to know about Derek, her ex-husband. What about he? Derek contacted me 3 months ago, before you even showed up here. Amy looked at me in shock. He wanted to warn me about Rebecca, about her schemes. Apparently, after the divorce, he started investigating the marriage finances and discovered a pattern. I showed Amy a folder Derek had sent me. Rebecca didn't pull this scam on you alone. Over the past 15 years, she's found and manipulated at least 7 young people in vulnerable situations. Always the same pattern: pretend to be a mentor, introduce a business partner, convince the victim to invest money, then disappear when everything falls apart. Amy flipped through the documents, seeing photos and names of other victims. 7 people. 7 that we've been able to identify. There are probably more. I paused to let the information sink in. Derek said Rebecca has always been careful not to leave any evidence, but this time he made a mistake. He used someone with a direct connection to me. The truth was beginning to form a complete picture. Rebecca hadn't just destroyed my relationship with Amy out of personal revenge. She had turned our daughter into a tool for his systematic scams. And now, by sending Amy to me, she had inadvertently handed over all the evidence needed to destroy his entire scheme. So Derek was trying to protect me? Amy asked. Derek was trying to protect his next victims. You were just the catalyst. I picked up my phone again. And now, let's give Rebecca the call she's been waiting for. If you're following this story of stolen parenthood and calculated revenge, subscribe to the channel to see how a father who lost everything can rebuild not only his relationship with his daughter, but also ensure that justice is served. Amy dialed her mother's number with trembling hands. When Rebecca answered, I could hear the anxious anticipation in her voice. Amy? Did you get him? I did, Mom. Dad said he'll help. He wants to meet with her in person to work out the details. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Rebecca was calculating, as she always did. Where does he want to meet? Here at the mansion. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Perfect. I'll be there. When Amy hung up, I was finishing the last details of my plan. Rebecca would come to my house thinking she was about to receive $500,000 and escape with her manipulations intact. Instead, she would find something very different. A father who had spent 20 years waiting for this very moment to show her what happens when you underestimate someone who has lost everything and has nothing left to lose. Except, of course, a daughter to protect and justice to serve. Rebecca arrived promptly at 2 in the afternoon, driving a BMW that was clearly beyond her current financial means. I watched through the security camera as she checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, adjusting her lipstick and smoothing her platinum blonde hair, which now showed dark roots. Even in financial difficulty, Rebecca kept up appearances, a trait that had always defined her. Amy was visibly nervous, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Dad, are you sure this is the right thing to do?" "Amy, his mother committed federal crimes using his name. If we don't do this now, you could face prison for crimes you didn't commit." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Trust me." When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath. 20 years of humiliation, of returned letters, of lies told about his character, it all led to this moment. I opened the door, and there was her. Rebecca at 53 was still an attractive woman, but there was something calculated about her beauty now, as if every detail was carefully crafted to impress. Her blue eyes quickly scanned me, assessing my appearance, her casual but clearly expensive clothes, the interior of the mansion behind her. "Neil," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look well. Amy told me you've become very successful." "Rebecca." I kept my voice neutral. "Please come in." She walked past me, his high heels echoing on the marble floor, her eyes cataloging every detail of the decor. Original paintings, imported furniture, the spectacular view from the living room. I could see the figures calculating in her mind. "Wow," I said, clearly impressed despite trying to sound casual. "This is impressive." Amy was sitting on the couch, visibly tense. Rebecca approached her with open arms. "My dear, how are you feeling? I know it must be difficult to have to ask his father for help after all this time." Amy accepted the hug stiffly, avoiding my gaze. Rebecca interpreted this as natural nervousness. "Sit down, Rebecca," she said, gesturing to the armchair across from the sofa. "We have a lot to talk about." She settled down, crossing her legs elegantly. "Neil, I can't express how much this means to us." Amy was desperate, and I simply didn't have the resources to help her. "When she suggested looking to you." "She suggested?" I interrupted. "Interesting. Amy told me it was his idea." A flash of irritation crossed Rebecca's face, quickly masked by a smile. "Well, you know how it is. We talked so much about the options that it's hard to remember exactly who said what first." "Of course." I walked over to my desk and picked up a folder. "Before we discuss financial assistance, there are a few things I need to clarify." Rebecca straightened her posture, his survival instinct kicking in. "What kind of things? For example, how did you meet Lucas Brennan?" The change in Rebecca was subtle but noticeable. Her shoulders tensed slightly, his hands clenched in her lap. "Lucas? Amy's ex-boyfriend? She brought him to a party at our house." "Why?" "Because Lucas Brennan doesn't exist." I opened the folder and removed the first few pages. "His real name is Lucas Martinez. History of fraud in Nevada and Colorado. And you two have a joint bank account in the Cayman Islands." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca looked at Amy, then at his brain working furiously to find a way out. "This is ridiculous," he finally said. "I never." 6 months of phone records," I continued, placing more documents on the coffee table. 243 calls between you and Lucas before he met Amy. Bank transfers. Coordinated airline ticket purchases. Rebecca stood up abruptly. "I don't know what game you're playing, Neil, but—" 7 previous victims, I said calmly, blocking her escape. "In the last 15 years. Always the same pattern. You find vulnerable young people, gain their trust, introduce them to a business partner, convince them to invest money, and then disappear when it all falls apart. Neil, if you have some kind of fabricated evidence." "Derek came to me 3 months ago," I said, pulling a letter from my briefcase. "His ex-wife. He wanted to warn me about you. Apparently, after the divorce, he started looking into your marriage finances and discovered an interesting pattern." I placed the letter on the table. Rebecca read it quickly, his face turning pale. "Derek documented all of his victims," I continued. "Jennifer, from Portland. Michael, from Phoenix. Samantha, From Denver. All young, all trusting, all left with debts they didn't incur. You're pathetic, Rebecca exploded, finally losing her composure. 20 years later and you're still obsessed with me. This is stalking. No, Rebecca. This is justice. That's when the doorbell rang again. Rebecca looked at the door, then at him, a look of panic beginning to form. Are you expecting someone? Amy asked, also confused. I walked over to the security monitor. 2 federal agents in dark suits were standing at the front gate. Special Agent Rodriguez, FBI, I announced, turning to Rebecca. And Agent Thompson. Financial Crimes Division. Rebecca's face drained of color. Neil, what have you done? What I should have done 20 years ago. I pressed the button to open the gate. I protected my daughter. Rebecca turned to Amy, her hands shaking. Amy, you have to help me. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. That your father is lying. Mom, Amy said, her voice breaking, did you really do this? Did you really use her name to steal money? I was protecting you. Securing our future. You were securing your future, I corrected. Amy was just the most convenient tool. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. Agents Rodriguez and Thompson showed their badges, his professional but determined faces. Mr. Sullivan? We received her call about fraudulent activities involving Rebecca Sullivan and Lucas Martinez. Come in, please. Ms. Sullivan is in the living room, along with the evidence I collected. When we returned to the room, Rebecca was sitting on the floor next to Amy, holding her daughter's hands and whispering desperately. Amy, you don't understand. Everything I did was for us. After Derek left me, I had nothing. Nothing. Do you think it was easy to find a way to support us? Excuse me, said Agent Rodriguez. Rebecca Sullivan, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We need to talk to his wife about fraudulent activities involving multiple victims and federal bank fraud. Rebecca let go of Amy's hands and stood up slowly. I want a lawyer. That's his right, Agent Thompson replied. But first, he needs to understand that we have substantial evidence of at least 8 different cases of investment fraud, including forgery of federal documents and use of stolen identities. I handed the agents the complete file I had prepared. Bank records, correspondence, phone recordings, statements from previous victims. Agent Rodriguez quickly leafed through the documents. This is very thorough, Mr. Sullivan. With evidence of this quality, we're talking multiple federal charges. Rebecca looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of hatred and despair. You can't do this to him. Amy is his daughter. Amy is his daughter too, I replied calmly. And unlike you, I would never use her as a tool for a crime. Mrs. Sullivan, Agent Thompson said, you need to come with us for questioning at the federal office. Your daughter Amy will also need to give a statement, but as an apparent victim, not a suspect. Amy stood up, tears streaming down her face. Mom, why did you do this? Why did you use my name? Rebecca looked at her, then at me, then at the federal agents. The reality of her situation finally hit her fully. Because, she began, then stopped. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had known decades ago, before manipulation had become second nature to her. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Amy asked. Of being nobody. Of having nothing. Of having to admit that every choice I made, every bridge I burned, was wrong. Agent Rodriguez approached her with handcuffs. Rebecca Sullivan, you are under arrest on suspicion of federal bank fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of federal documents. As they read his rights, Rebecca looked at me one last time. You got what you wanted, Neil. I hope you're satisfied. It wasn't about getting what I wanted, Rebecca, I replied. It was about protecting what matters most. I looked at Amy, who was watching her mother being led away in handcuffs by federal agents. 20 years of lies were finally unraveling, but I knew the real work, rebuilding my relationship with my daughter and helping her process decades of manipulation, was just beginning. When the door closed behind the agents and Rebecca, Amy turned to me with tears in her eyes. Dad, I'm so sorry. For everything. For believing her, for never looking for him, for... Amy, I said softly, opening my arms. You were a child. None of this was her fault. She ran into my arms for the first time in 20 years, and I felt as if a wound that had been open for 2 decades was finally beginning to heal. But as I held my daughter, I knew this was only the first step. Rebecca would still try to manipulate the situation in some way, even from prison. And I would be ready for every move she made. Because now, finally, I had something she could never destroy again, the truth. 3 months after Rebecca's arrest, I sat with Amy in the mansion's garden, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. She had moved into the guest room 2 weeks after her mother's arrest, initially just until she could get her life back together, but now we were talking about making the arrangement permanent. "I got a letter from Mom today," Amy said, holding an open envelope. "From the Federal Detention Center." "What did she say?" "That she loves me. That she did everything for me. That you manipulated her into looking guilty." Amy folded the letter carefully. Even from prison, she's still trying to rewrite history. Rebecca had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison on multiple counts of fraud. Lucas received 15 years after being extradited from Miami. 7 other victims had come forward during the trial, turning the case into one of the largest investment fraud operations on the West Coast. "Derek called me yesterday," I continued. "Investigators found another $2 million in offshore accounts that Rebecca had hidden over the years. The money will be distributed among the victims." Amy nodded, but I could tell something else was bothering her. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Did you plan all of this? From the moment I got here?" It was a fair question. Over the past few weeks, as we processed everything that had happened, Amy had begun to realize how precisely each move had been executed. "Not exactly," I replied honestly. "I hoped that one day Rebecca would make a mistake big enough to expose herself. When Derek came to me 3 months ago, I knew that day was coming. But I didn't know it would be through his. What if I hadn't shown up? Then I would have found another way to protect her next victims." I looked at Amy. "But I'm grateful you did show up. Not just because I was able to protect him, but because I finally got to meet the extraordinary woman his daughter has become." Amy smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. 20 years lost. "Not lost," I corrected her. "Delayed. There's a difference." In the weeks that followed, Amy started working at my company, helping to develop security protocols to protect small investors from scams like the one she had fallen for. Her experience as a victim, combined with her natural intelligence, brought a valuable perspective that would save others from going through the same trauma. "You know," Amy said one morning as we reviewed proposals to expand our investor protection program, "I think I understand why Mom did what she did." "How so?" "She was so afraid of being nothing that she became everything she despised." Amy paused. "But that doesn't excuse her. It just explains it." Amy's maturity constantly impressed me. At 28, she had survived 2 decades of psychological manipulation and still emerged with compassion and wisdom. 6 months later, I hosted a party at our house, not a formal charity gala, but a simple gathering with the people who had become her real family. Derek was there with his new girlfriend, her public school teacher who made him laugh genuinely. Marcus, my security director, brought his wife and twin sons. Amy had invited co-workers who had become close friends. During the party, Amy approached me in the kitchen. "Dad, can I tell you a secret?" "Sure." "Part of me feels guilty for being happy. Like finding my real family is somehow betraying Mom." "Amy, her loyalty doesn't belong to someone who hurt her. It belongs to someone who loves her unconditionally." I put a hand on her shoulder. Rebecca had 20 years to choose love over manipulation. She chose manipulation. That's not his fault. Later that night, when everyone had left, Amy and I sat down in the garden again. It was the same place where we had processed Rebecca's arrest months earlier, but now it had a completely different energy. "You know what impresses me most about this whole situation?" Amy asked. "What?" "You could have destroyed Mom in a much crueler way. You could have exposed her publicly, humiliated her, made a spectacle of the situation." Amy looked up at the stars. "But you simply presented the truth and let justice take its course. Revenge is temporary, Amy. Justice is permanent." A year later, Amy and he launched the Neil and Amy Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to helping young adults who have been victims of family financial fraud. Our first event raised $500,000 and helped dozens of victims rebuild her life. Rebecca still writes to me occasionally from prison, letters full of justifications and pleas for forgiveness that ring hollow after decades of lies. I don't respond, but I keep the letters as a reminder that some people choose destruction over and over again until they have no other choice. Amy, on the other hand, chose to build. She chose to grow. She chose to become the kind of person who protects others instead of exploiting her vulnerabilities. Last week she told me, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't know you were trying." 20 years of returned letters, rejected gifts, and forced silence finally made sense. They weren't wasted years. They were years of preparation for this moment, when I could finally be the father I always wanted to be. And Rebecca? She discovered that destroying a family doesn't guarantee you'll build a new one. It just guarantees you'll be left alone with the consequences of your choices.